The judge looked directly at me, his voice calm but cold. "I see no evidence that the child is safer with her." I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking. Every breath felt like it was catching in my throat. I glanced across the courtroom and saw Brandon, my ex-husband, sitting with that smug grin he always wears when he knows he's winning. Next to him, Cassidy, his new wife, leaned over and whispered something into his ear. He chuckled under his breath. She turned slightly and looked straight at me. I could read her lips. She lost. That was the moment it hit me. After months of preparing, documenting, praying for someone to believe me, I was about to lose custody of my daughter. Not because I was a bad mother, not because I didn't love her more than anything in the world, but because I didn't have the right kind of proof, the kind that fits neatly into court documents, the kind that doesn't come with a child's fear or a mother's gut instinct. Brandon had painted me as unstable, over-emotional, unfit. He told the court I worked nights and left our daughter unattended. He brought up my past struggle with anxiety, conveniently leaving out that it was during our marriage when I was dealing with his cheating, his control, his gaslighting. He told them Cassidy had been a stabilizing force, that she was great with kids, that their home was peaceful. Meanwhile, our daughter, Seren, sat quietly with the child advocate, legs swinging, hair tied in a neat braid I'd done that morning before we left, her little hands folded in her lap. She was being so good, so still, too still. The judge looked down at his papers. I could see him getting ready to speak. I knew that tone, that rhythm. He was preparing to deliver the ruling. My stomach twisted so hard it hurt. I reached for something, anything inside myself to stop what was coming, but nothing came out, not words, not strength. I had already said everything I could. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, a small voice cut through the room. "Mom," everyone turned. Seren had stood up from her seat. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Her hand gripped something by her side, a pink tablet, one I hadn't seen her take that morning. She looked straight at me, then up at the judge. "Mom," she said again, her voice steady, "can I show him the video you didn't know I saved?" The room went still. I felt my heart stop. The judge blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What video?" Seren took a step forward and held the tablet out in both hands. "It's from Daddy's house." Brandon was out of his chair in an instant. "Your Honor, she's 7. She doesn't understand what—" The judge held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Seren. "Bring it here." The bailiff stepped forward, gently took the tablet from her, and brought it to the judge's bench. Brandon was fuming, whispering angrily to Cassidy. She looked pale now, the blood drained from her face. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even know what was on that tablet. I hadn't seen her record anything. I hadn't told her to. I never wanted to put that kind of responsibility on her shoulders, but something in her had decided to act. On her own. Quietly, bravely. She looked back at me and smiled just a little. Not a happy smile, a brave one. The kind that says, "It's okay, Mom, I've got us." And just like that, everything started to shift. My name is Naomi Ellery, and for most of my life, I thought I was pretty good at hiding pain. I had to be. My childhood taught me how to smile when things were breaking behind my eyes. My marriage taught me how to stay quiet when I wanted to scream. And motherhood taught me how to keep going even when every part of me wanted to give up. But nothing prepared me for the day I realized I might lose my daughter. Not to tragedy, not to illness, but to the very man I had spent years trying to escape. Brandon and I had been together for nearly a decade. From the outside, we looked like a perfect couple. He was charming, well-spoken, clean-cut, the kind of man who could say all the right things in front of the right people. At home, behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. Controlling, dismissive, manipulative in ways I didn't understand until much later. When I got pregnant with Seren, things changed. For a while, it seemed like we might be okay. He brought me flowers. He read parenting books. He held my hand at doctor's appointments, but it didn't last. Once Seren was born and the attention wasn't on him anymore, the mask slipped. He didn't hit me, not in the way people think of abuse. But words can bruise, too. He tore into me piece by piece until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped calling friends. I stopped dreaming. It took me 3 years to find the strength to leave. I filed for divorce the night he screamed at Seren, so loudly she wet herself. She was 4. She apologized to him as she cried. That night, I packed what I could and drove to my mother's house with Seren asleep in the back seat. My mom, June, took us in. She's tough, a retired school teacher who believes in truth and consequences. She raised me on her own after my dad left. She's been through storms, so she recognized the weather in my eyes. She gave us her spare room and started making tea every night the way she used to when I was little. Just having her nearby made things feel possible again. I found work as a night shift nurse. It's exhausting, but it pays the bills. My schedule is upside down, and I live in a rented duplex that smells like mildew when it rains, but it's ours. Seren has a little bookshelf full of fairy tales and a nightlight shaped like the moon. I keep trying to build something stable, something she can feel safe in. But Brandon didn't let go. He filed for joint custody almost immediately, and because he had never been arrested, never left a bruise, the court saw no reason not to allow it. He got weekend visits. At first, Seren would come back quiet, withdrawn. She stopped drawing for a while. She started wetting the bed again. She wouldn't talk to me about what happened there, only that Cassidy, Brandon's new wife, didn't like when she cried. Cassidy came into the picture like a thunderclap. She was younger, pretty in an Instagram-filtered kind of way, and always dressed like she was headed to a business meeting. Brandon married her 6 months after our divorce was finalized. She moved into my old house and started playing the role of doting stepmother. She posted pictures of Seren smiling on Facebook and used captions like, "Our perfect little blended family." But Seren's eyes in those photos were never smiling. I started keeping notes. I took pictures of every bruise, every scratch, every time Seren said she fell down the stairs, but wouldn't meet my eyes. I recorded her nightmares when she'd wake up screaming and shaking. I brought it all to my lawyer, but he told me it was circumstantial. We needed hard evidence. And so I braced myself for court. I stayed up late preparing statements. I worked extra shifts to pay for a custody evaluator. I tried to believe the truth would be enough, that someone would see past Brandon's polished lies and understand what was really happening. But the closer the hearing came, the more doubt crept in. I'd seen how people believed him. He had a way of twisting things, of making me seem irrational just by staying calm. I knew I was walking into a courtroom that wasn't built to understand quiet pain. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. Seren was still asleep, curled up under her favorite quilt with her arms wrapped around her stuffed giraffe. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you." Then I got dressed, packed my evidence, and prayed that someone, anyone, would finally listen. What I didn't know was that Seren had already found a way to speak. The courthouse smelled like dust and old coffee, the kind of smell that settles in your clothes and follows you home. I walked in alone, gripping my folder so tightly my knuckles hurt. Inside were all the photos, the notes, the drawings Seren had made, everything I had gathered over the last year to show the court what she couldn't say out loud. Brandon was already seated with his attorney. His suit looked expensive. His smile came easy. Cassidy sat next to him in a navy dress, her arms crossed, her legs neatly tucked beneath the bench, like she was attending a brunch, not a custody hearing. They looked like the picture of stability, and I hated how convincing it all was. The courtroom filled slowly. My mother sat in the back row, her hands folded, her face unreadable. The child advocate led Seren to the bench reserved for minors. She sat quietly, feet barely touching the floor. Her pink backpack rested on her lap. She didn't look scared. She looked small, smaller than I remembered her being just that morning. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was tall, serious, and spoke with a voice that didn't invite questions. He introduced the case, reviewed the timeline, and opened the floor for each side. Brandon's attorney stood first. He began by praising Brandon's character, his stable employment, his marriage to Cassidy, and the positive environment of their home. He mentioned my anxiety. He brought up my night shifts, how Seren spent evenings with my mother, how I had changed addresses twice since the divorce. He called me inconsistent. I sat still as he picked apart my life with surgical precision. He didn't lie. He just told pieces of the truth that sounded uglier when stacked together. Then it was my turn. I stood up and gave everything I had. I told the judge about Seren's nightmares, about the bruises she couldn't explain, about the time she flinched when someone knocked on the front door. I explained how I had documented everything. I handed over drawings Seren had made, showing a stick figure girl behind bars crying. I submitted voice recordings of her whispering that Cassidy didn't like her, that Daddy yelled a lot, that she wanted to stay home with me. The judge listened, but I could tell it wasn't landing. His expression didn't change. When I finished, he asked if there was any physical evidence, any video, any witness. I looked down at my shoes. No, Your Honor. The courtroom went quiet. Brandon leaned back in his chair with that smug tilt of the chin I had come to hate. Cassidy leaned in and whispered something in his ear. He smiled. Then he stood and spoke for himself. He told the court that he wanted what was best for Seren, that he supported my role in her life, but that she needed structure. He said I was emotional, that I was struggling to keep up. He used the word unstable. He wrapped it in polite language, but it cut like a blade. He ended by saying he and Cassidy had created a nurturing home, and he would never expose Seren to harm. I wanted to scream, but I knew that would only prove his point. The judge asked to speak with Seren privately, then called for a short recess. I sat down hard, my legs shaky. My mother leaned forward and squeezed my shoulder. You did what you could. I wasn't sure it was enough. When we returned, the judge summarized what he had reviewed. He said that while he saw signs of concern, there was no concrete proof of abuse. He noted the conflicting testimonies, the lack of medical reports, the absence of objective evidence. Then he paused. I held my breath. My palms were slick with sweat. I see no evidence, he said, that the child is safer with her. I didn't hear anything after that. The words echoed and twisted until everything felt distant. My body sat still, but my heart was screaming. I looked at Seren. Her head was bowed. Her fingers clutched the straps of her backpack. Across the room, Brandon smirked. Cassidy whispered, "She lost." Something inside me broke. I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. Because then, Seren stood up. Serene stood up slowly, both hands gripping her backpack. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence that followed the judge's ruling, it was the only thing anyone could hear. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but clear. "Can I show him the video you didn't know I saved?" Everything in the room stopped. The judge raised his eyebrows. Brandon looked over, confused, then concerned. Cassidy turned sharply toward Seren. I sat frozen, heart pounding in my chest, unsure if I had heard her right. "What video?" the judge asked, his tone cautious but curious. Serene didn't answer right away. Instead, she unzipped her backpack and pulled out her pink tablet. It had a small crack along the edge and stickers of stars and bunnies covering the back. She hugged it close for a second, then stepped forward and held it out to the child advocate. The judge looked down from the bench. "Please bring that to me," he instructed. The child advocate glanced at me, then walked with Serene toward the bailiff, who gently took the tablet and brought it up to the bench. The judge adjusted his glasses and tapped the screen, scanning its contents. He pressed play. No one spoke. Brandon shifted in his seat, visibly nervous now. Cassidy sat rigid, eyes locked on the judge. I didn't move. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap I could feel my fingernails digging into my palms. A few seconds passed. Then the judge looked up sharply. "Where and when was this recorded?" he asked. Serene's voice remained steady. "At Daddy's house last month. I used the camera app." The judge nodded and returned to the screen. He turned the volume up. We all heard it. Brandon's voice, loud and unmistakable, echoing from another room. He was yelling. Not frustrated, not annoyed, but full of rage. Accusations and insults flew in every direction. Then Cassidy's voice entered the frame. She was yelling too, sharper, more targeted, the sound of something slamming, a chair or a door. Serene's quiet sobs could be heard under it all. Then Cassidy's voice, cold and direct. "If you don't stop crying, I will give you something to cry about." Then the sound of a hand hitting something, a thud, a whimper, and Serene's voice muffled and scared. "Ow, please don't." I couldn't listen anymore. My throat was tight, my stomach churning. I turned away, but the damage had already been done. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs and whispered judgments, was silent. The judge took off his glasses. His face, up until now composed and detached, had changed. His jaw was tight. His voice, when he spoke, was different. "This is extremely serious." Brandon stood up. "Your Honor, that recording was taken without consent. It's manipulated. She probably—" "Sit down, Mr. Ellery." Brandon's mouth opened again, but the bailiff took a step forward. He sat. Cassidy looked pale now. Her arms were crossed so tightly they looked locked. She leaned toward Brandon, whispering furiously, but he wouldn't look at her. The judge spoke again. "This video constitutes credible evidence of potential child endangerment and emotional abuse. The court will immediately refer this matter to Child Protective Services and law enforcement for further investigation." He turned toward me. "Effective immediately, sole physical and legal custody is granted to Ms. Naomi Ellery. Mr. Ellery is restricted to supervised visitation until a full evaluation is conducted. This ruling takes effect today." I didn't move. I couldn't. The words took a moment to reach me, to register in my bones. Then Seren turned and looked at me. That same brave smile from before, just a little wider now. She didn't run. She walked to me slowly and wrapped her arms around my waist. I bent down and held her, my cheek against her hair, the tablet still in her small hand. The courtroom buzzed back to life behind us. The bailiff was speaking with the clerk. The attorneys were whispering to their clients. Brandon sat with his head in his hands. Cassidy stared straight ahead like she couldn't see anything at all. I didn't care. I didn't look at them again. Serene had saved herself. She had saved us both. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. I sat there with Serene's arms wrapped around my waist as the courtroom moved in a blur around us. The judge was still speaking, but I only caught fragments. Emergency custody, immediate protection order, investigation launched, supervised visitation. Every word pulled us further away from the nightmare we had been living in. The bailiff approached and quietly asked me to come forward and sign a temporary custody transfer form. Serene's fingers tightened on mine, and I brought her with me. I wasn't letting go, not even for a second. As I stood there, pen shaking in my hand, I looked up at the bench. The judge met my eyes and gave a small nod, the kind that says, "Now I understand." He didn't smile, but his expression had changed. There was something in it that hadn't been there before. Recognition, a kind of silent apology. I signed the form. When I turned around, I saw Brandon still in his seat. His face was tight, red around the edges, his jaw clenched. Cassidy sat beside him, like a statue. Her hands were folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Neither of them looked at me. Neither looked at Seren. Seren watched them quietly as we walked past. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her truth had already spoken louder than anything either of them had tried to say for months. Outside the courtroom, the air hit different, brighter, quieter, the kind of silence that follows a storm. I bent down and looked Seren in the eyes. "Where did you learn to do that?" I asked her. She blinked like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble. "I heard you tell Nana that you needed proof, that people don't believe unless there's proof. So I used the tablet. I hid it under the couch pillow. I didn't tell you because I thought, if you knew, you'd be scared." My throat burned. "You were scared," I said. She nodded. "But you did it anyway." She nodded again. I pulled her into my arms and held her so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against mine. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding her to protect her. I was holding her because she had protected herself. We got into the car, and as I buckled her seatbelt, she looked at me and asked, "Am I going back to Daddy's house this weekend?" "No," I said, "not anymore." She didn't smile. She just let out a long breath and leaned her head back against the seat, the kind of relief that even a child recognizes when it's been carried too long. When we got home, my mom was waiting at the kitchen table. She stood when she saw us, tears already in her eyes. She wrapped Seren in a hug and then looked at me like she was seeing me again for the first time. "I knew you'd get her back," she whispered. "I didn't," I said. "She got us back." That night, Seren crawled into bed beside me. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, clutching the same stuffed giraffe she had carried since she was 3. I watched her chest rise and fall, peaceful, safe. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We filed for a permanent custody modification. I submitted the video as evidence. The police opened an investigation. Cassidy was charged with child endangerment. Brandon was placed under a formal review by Child Services. His weekend visits were suspended, and a guardian ad litem was assigned to monitor all future interactions. I started hearing from people I hadn't expected. The court-appointed therapist offered additional support. A woman from a local shelter reached out and connected us with a counselor for children recovering from emotional trauma. My workplace adjusted my schedule so I could be home more during the day. The world didn't change overnight, but for the first time, it felt like it could. The following weekend, Seren and I went to the park. We walked by the lake, bought lemonades from a stand near the playground, and sat on the swings until the sun began to set. At one point, she looked up at me and asked, "Can we plant something? Like a flower or a tree?" I asked her why. Because everything feels new now, and when things feel new, you should plant something. So we did. The next day, we went to the garden center, picked out a small tree with pink blossoms, and planted it in the backyard. She named it the Restart Tree. Every time I look at it, I remember that courtroom, the silence after her voice, the sound of truth breaking through lies, and the moment I realized that sometimes, even at 7 years old, a child can change everything. It's been 5 months since the courtroom fell silent, and Seren stood with that tablet in her hands. 5 months since the judge reversed the decision and gave us back the life I was afraid we had lost forever. A lot has changed since then. Some of it happened quickly, like the investigation into Brandon and Cassidy. Others happened slowly, like the way Seren started sleeping through the night again. No more screaming from nightmares. No more waking up and asking if she had to go back. The court made the custody change permanent after a full review. Brandon's visitation rights are now limited and supervised, and only allowed in the presence of a licensed child advocate. Cassidy was charged with child endangerment and fined. She took a plea deal, and part of her agreement prevents her from having any unsupervised contact with Seren for the next 3 years. Seren still asks questions. Sometimes she wants to talk about the day in court. Sometimes she just wants to know why adults lie. I never give her complicated answers. I tell her the truth in words she understands. Some people lie because they don't want the truth to change things. Some people hurt others because they're hurting inside. And sometimes people stay silent when they should speak up because they're scared. But the most important thing I remind her is that what she did that day was not just brave. It was right. She carries a quiet kind of strength now. Not loud, not proud, but steady. She's starting to laugh more. She paints on weekends. She made a friend at school named Mia, and they've become inseparable. They sit together at lunch. They draw unicorns and foxes and leave sticky notes on each other's desks that say things like, "You're magic and we're best forever." As for me, I've learned to breathe again. I used to live in fear, measuring every moment by how it might be used against me. I don't do that anymore. Still have hard days. I still carry the weight of everything we went through, but it's not the same kind of heavy. Now it feels like something earned, something we carried through and survived. My relationship with my mom grew stronger too. She never said, "I told you so." She just kept showing up. She helps me with Serene's homework when I'm tired. She cooks dinner twice a week. Sometimes we sit in the backyard and just watch Seren run through the grass, her arms stretched out like she's flying. That tree we planted is growing fast. Seren waters it every evening. She named it the Restart Tree, and the name stuck. It stands in the corner of our yard near the fence line, pink blossoms blooming stronger every week. It's become a symbol for us, a reminder that even after the ugliest winters, something good can take root. I've started journaling again. I write down the things I want Seren to know when she's older, not just about what happened in court, but about the kind of woman I hope she becomes. Brave, yes, but also kind. Strong, but not hardened. Smart enough to speak, but wise enough to listen. I tell her in writing what I tell her every night before bed. You are safe. You are loved. You are never alone. There are people who told me to stop fighting, that the courts rarely side with mothers without hard proof, that sometimes, even when you know something is wrong, the system won't see it until it's too late. I believed that for a while. I let that fear eat at me. But Seren didn't. Somehow, she found a way to tell the truth when I couldn't anymore. She reminded me that sometimes what saves us isn't the system or the law. Sometimes it's one moment of courage from someone we love. We're not broken. We're rebuilding. And the foundation this time is real. This story didn't end the way I thought it would. It ended better. Not because it was easy or fair, but because a little girl decided to speak when no one else would. That's what changed everything. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, or reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, please take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. You never know who's waiting for a story like this to remind them they're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Whether you're a mom, a survivor, a child of divorce, or someone who's found the courage to speak up, your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more true stories that uncover the quiet power people carry, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart.